Hello and welcome to The Viewpoint. I'm your host, Rifat Malik, and my producer is Sarah Al-Bastani. Here on Radio Caravan 104.1 FM and 700 AM, as well as worldwide on our free app. Every weekday Thursday at 2 p.m. we bring you expert analysis of the latest local and national stories, and we'd love your views on all the issues we cover. Before we get to our guest, Sarah's going to kick off with the Viewpoint headlines.
Thanks, Rifat. So, number one viewpoint. It's reported the FBI has joined a criminal investigation into the Boeing 737 MAX jets after two crashes since October killed a total of 346 people. Next week, the U.S. Senate is scheduled to discuss aviation safety as industry regulators around the world have grounded more than 300 MAX 8s after the second deadly accident in Ethiopia earlier this month. Number two. Murder trial date set for former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger in shooting death of Botham Jean. Geiger is charged with unlawfully killing the unarmed black man last year after claiming she mistook his apartment for her own. Number three, Donald Trump backlash following renewed attacks on the late Senator John McCain. His comments yesterday that he gave the decorated war veteran who died of brain cancer last year the funeral he wanted has been widely condemned. Daughter Meghan McCain called this a new bizarre low.
Thank you, Sarah. Now for the Viewpoint in focus. The horrific mass shooting in two mosques in New Zealand last week, resulting in 50 deaths and as many injured, was one of the deadliest in the country's modern history. Yesterday, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced an immediate ban on assault rifles and military-style automatic weapons. Sadly, of course, here in the United States, we are no stranger to such atrocities. It was just last October when a gunman shot and killed 11 worshippers in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. With me on the line is Professor Larry Eisenberg, congregant and board member of that synagogue. Hello, Professor Eisenberg.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us today. So tomorrow will be the first Friday Jummah prayer for American Muslims since the attack. Understandably, there's some trepidation about attending a mosque. Can you tell us when you and your congregants were able to return to your place of worship?
Yes, let me start by expressing again my congregation's and indeed the Jewish community's condolences to Muslims for the terrible attack on your fellow Muslims in New Zealand. And I do want to tell you also that for this Friday Jummah prayer, members of the synagogue and the Jewish community are going to be going to the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh. We want to stand symbolically outside as the worshipers arrive for prayer so they feel safe and supported, and it's our intention to remain there at the mosque for the duration of the prayers. As far as moving back into the building, we have not moved back into our building, and in fact, we probably will not be able to do so for perhaps another 1 or 2 years. The building has obviously been desecrated. It is no longer a prayerful place. The FBI has released it, so it's no longer an active crime scene. But it's certainly not anywhere that we can bring people back in and go about the joyful business of worship.
I think anyone would understand those sentiments.
Yes, absolutely. So, it's not clear. Do you actually demolish, the part of the building in which the murders occurred and rebuild? Do you gut the building and then remodel it in a way that will not be a constant reminder of what happened there?
Yeah, I can see that, Laurie, these are very difficult questions, and I'm sure that in New Zealand they will be facing very similar dilemma. I wanted to ask you about Rabbi Jeffrey Meyers, the rabbi of your synagogue. He gained national and international recognition for his quite inspiring reaction to the horrific attack on your synagogue. And recently he said that he wasn't surprised by the New Zealand incident. For him, it wasn't if, but when would another place of worship be targeted. Do you share this almost fatalistic view of, the situation that we're in?
Absolutely. I don't know that it's fatalistic as much as it's sadly realistic. And I will tell you from the very beginning, as we tried to pull ourselves together after the attack, we did say to one another, we have to remember how comforting and how supporting the local and the national, international community has been to us. And when the next mass murder in a house of worship takes place, not if, but when, we have to remember that it's now on us to kind of pay it forward and to step up and to help those next victims.
And in that similar vein, in an extraordinary act of generosity and compassion, your congregation has actually set up a GoFundMe page for the New Zealand victims' families. And I'm not sure what the current amount is, but you've raised many thousands of dollars for them.
Yes, we're over $52,000 on the way to our goal of $100,000. This also was a no-brainer. The Pittsburgh Muslim community immediately stepped up to our side. The executive director of the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh announced that the Muslim community was ready to come and stand outside of our houses of worship to make sure that Jews felt safe going in to pray there. They spoke out immediately, forcefully, unequivocally in support of the Jewish community. And they raised quite a large amount of money from Muslims across America for our benefit. And we appreciate it. We do not forget it. And we are right here, and we have their backs as well.
I wanted to ask your view of the New Zealand government's reaction to what happened. Yesterday it was announced, as I said earlier, that the government would be putting an immediate ban on AR and semi-automatic weapons. I wonder, Professor Eisenberg, would you want that kind of radical action here in the United States?
I can't speak for the entire congregation as far as taking a position on gun control and legislation. But I will say that I am impressed by the fact that this awful thing happened, and the government in New Zealand is looking it straight in the eye and trying to take steps, whatever they may be, to prevent such a horrific thing from occurring again.
Mm-hmm. And I think also that the world has been in awe of the reaction of the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Her compassion and at the same time her determination has been widely praised both nationally and internationally.
Absolutely.
Finally, Professor, I wanted to ask you, perhaps in some ways you've kind of answered this question, but tell me, in all the negativity and all this, the kind of, I must say, like a sort of like national, international depression about the state of affairs, about these tragic and horrific acts of violence. In your experience in Pittsburgh, based on your experience there, is there a positive? Is there something that you can take away from this that actually, brings some kind of closure or brings something positive out of the experience?
There is. I think there's a clear silver lining here, and it is the renewed interfaith efforts amongst not just Jews and Muslims, but Christians. There was an event for us at the local Hindu temple as well. We really see people of all faiths coming together in a very deliberate way to support one another, to keep one another safe. And I think it's a very loud and resounding response to these hateful gunmen that think they're going to destroy us when, in fact, we respond by coming together stronger than ever, rejecting their hatred and working together for a peaceful community where all faiths can live and worship side by side in peace.
I think everybody would agree with that. And just before you go, there was just one final thing. You mentioned people coming together, and I think there were a number of people who were noted for their incredible bravery during those assaults. There was a number of individuals who stood out and saved a lot of lives. And it reminds me that something very similar happened in your synagogue, that it was in fact Rabbi Meyers, Jeffrey Meyers, who had played a very significant role in heroically saving lives.
Absolutely. I do want to call out our first responders who were on the scene so rapidly and ran into fire and took five very serious injuries amongst 5 of the officers. But Rabbi Meyers, who has just been so impressive, just represented us with such dignity and eloquence. People, I think, don't remember that he himself was in the synagogue at the time of the attack. In fact, he was leading the service in which our 7 of the 11 casualties occurred. And he shouted for everyone to get down. He was at the front of the chapel, and he was able to actually escape to the choir loft. He put in the first 911 call, and he stayed on the line for 20 minutes, giving the 911 operator real-time information as to where he heard the gunman's footsteps and from which direction he was hearing firing. And he was of great help to the first responders who came to subdue the gunman. And we just couldn't be more proud of him. And under his example and his leadership, we are coming back strong, and this congregation is going to be okay.
Good. Well, I'm very, very pleased to hear that, and there's no doubt that Rabbi Meyers made an international impression with his incredible courage and his compassion. I want to thank you, Professor Eisenberg, for your incredible insight and for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we wish you and your fellow congregants well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, you heard that extraordinary story about what happened in Pittsburgh last year, and again how they are showing incredible compassion for the people of New Zealand and for their fellow Muslims in the Pittsburgh area. Now in the studio, I want to bring our attention to Shaheed Azam. He is a veteran law enforcement officer who is also a trained security and firearms expert. Welcome, Shaheed.
Thank you.
Shaheed, first of all, I want to ask you, as a Muslim, what feelings and emotions went through your mind when you learned what happened in New Zealand?
It was upsetting, understandably, and it's being part of the Muslim community. You feel that it's one of those things that hit close to home. But on the other hand, being a first responder and being also a citizen of the world, you don't wish that on anybody, and you don't actually want to see that ever happen. So it's sad anytime and every time it happens, regardless of who it is.
Yeah. Obviously, you weren't there on the ground, but from what you've read and what you've gathered, and as an expert in the field, do you think that there was anything that could have been done to avoid that tragedy or somehow lessen the catastrophic loss of life?
There's always something that could have been done to avoid incidents like these. But the number one thing, which is key, is to have the proper mindset and the proper attitude to respond to these things, and not take it for granted that just because it's a very safe area, nothing is ever going to happen. Also, having the training, and having also bringing people's expertise and resources together to prevent this from happening.
Do you recommend safety precautions for mosques or any place of worship or potential target? What kind of safety precautions would you recommend?
Well, for whether it's a mosque or church or synagogue or a school, because we've been having a lot of incidents occur in these types of campuses. again, we go back to the mindset to train people and make them aware, of what to do in case of an emergency or a catastrophe, be it an active shooting or a fire or a natural disaster. But the one thing I want to emphasize on is to have the proper technology, if it's permissible by budget. I mean, a lot of facilities don't have the luxury to have all that, but if we employ technology versus awareness and education to people, that would help. Also, if we can have tools that would prevent, let's say, incidents from happening, or if they do happen, how do we respond? Like, for example, what we call go bags, bags with medical kits, tourniquets, for example. I mean, I'm carrying one on me right now in case something happens. Also, fire alarms, smoke alarms, for example. Also, we have fire extinguishers. Place them in certain places. AED devices, defibrillators, and train certain people that are there more than others on how to use them in case something happens and then if they're needed.
Oh, and what about just simply personnel? I mean, is one security guard going to cut it in a situation where there is some kind of terror attack?
Absolutely not. I mean, when we work extra, the part-time jobs that we do outside from the police department, we ask the first question if we have a party or something that they want us to go work in, a festival or whatever it is. We ask how many people you're expecting, and we would like at least 2 to 3 officers per 100. Right. So if you employ only one security officer to protect multiple acres, and you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people, or if it's an SRO at a school, you're talking about thousands of students at one time at any given day. It's not enough.
Yeah. I know that you've been contacted by a number of places of worship in the wake of the tragedy in New Zealand. And I wonder if that, in the past, you found that you do get contacts in that way and the interest is spiked. But do these organizations and these boards follow through with that interest?
In the past, I've been in contact with a lot of them. Some of them, they have followed through, but then our problem is, as Americans and as humans, I mean, we relax really quick. Mm-hmm. So some of them have followed through just halfway to not to where I want to see it, whether it's with me or somebody else. But and some of them, yes, they do follow through. They install the cameras and the equipment, and they have the personnel. But they just leave it at that and no further training. But as of these days, I mean, last night I was meeting with one of the main Islamic centers in the DFW area, and tomorrow I have another one and another one. So it's hopefully they do the right thing and follow through and put that into place.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think that if the public or the Muslim community had a vote and they had to choose between certain luxuries, I mean, everybody loves the idea of a gym or having facilities for children, but if you don't have basic security, I think Muslim families and congregants would prefer that security was given paramount consideration.
It's funny you mentioned that, actually, because today me and my coworkers were sitting for lunch, and we thought of the same thing, that all this fundraising that we do for whether it's a synagogue or a mosque or whatever it is that you're fundraising for, instead of putting down money for new construction and new parking lots, why don't we take some of that portion to hire security intel to always be there? Because as you said, as the months go by from an attack, I wouldn't say defenses necessarily go down, but in the human nature, we tend to forget. We tend to kind of relax in our surroundings and not be as wary as when an attack happened just last week and people are just...
Absolutely, absolutely. I have one question for you, Shaheed. What about the argument that, because you mentioned training people with more, having more people who are able to use a firearm. There are some people who believe that people having weapons outside of law enforcement might mean there's a greater likelihood of accidental killings, perhaps in the chaos of things, especially in an active shooter situation. Do you think that's a danger?
There's not really a valid statistic that supports that. And unfortunately, we hear this every day about that kill people. The reason people die is because of guns and guns people. But if you go back to, the Department of Public Safety's website and look at their statistics of the firearms being employed or used in crimes. For example, I got statistics here all the way that go back to 1996 to 2019. If you look, for example, at the crime, which is a felony, is the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 1,269 convictions last year alone. Only 2 of them were concealed or were their license to carry out of 1,269. It's still a big number, but if you look at the overall, the ratio, it's not really anything. So and that would bring it to 0.1576% of those who are licensed to carry. So the problem is not with those who carry, because if you implement these laws on don't carry versus carry, and this is a gun-free zone, like some people like to call it, you're talking about prohibiting the good people like you and I and Sarah from going into these facilities to be, and be able to protect ourselves. And then you make it a safe environment for the would-be felon or shooter or what have you to come in and perpetrate his crime.
So, but I guess more than anything, you would advocate better training for people, that the training, because you can get a lot of training out there, but is it necessarily up to scratch?
I'm all for a training. It's just like this idea of just like because you have all these books in the library, it doesn't mean that they're all going to be read. That's reality. So just because there are guns out there and more people that are licensed, and that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to use them effectively in case something happens. So with that, I would say, go seek training, and the training could be not just on how to operate a firearm, because some people in the heat of the moment, they probably maybe freeze, maybe not be able to use it, maybe they just choose to run away and retreat, which is okay as well, because you're not obligated by law to engage in any situation like this. But let's say with everything that's going on right now, the attitude and the mentality of people is changing towards, I want to be able to protect rather than be a sheep and
So can you tell us, our listeners, very briefly, what are the sort of basics of how to react in an active shooter situation? What is the main key points that you tell your clients and people who are coming to you?
Well, one thing that they train us, and they train us to train people, is the concept of run, and if you cannot run, hide, and if you cannot hide, then you're going to have to fight. It just comes down to that. And the hero that stopped the shooter in New Zealand from continuing on, he
used a credit card machine,
yes.
Right, and threw it at his head,
and he stopped the shooting from continuing.
Yeah. So again, going back to the situation in New Zealand, I mean, were there things that you thought stood out in how things could have be done better or done appropriately?
I want to teach people to get rid of the mentality that a lot of people say, well, this is a safe area, nothing ever happens here. Just like when a police officer goes on duty, or some people get in security or in a professional job where they're required to wear a body armor, they say, well, nothing ever happens here, I don't need it. Well, the same thing, a lot of people say, well, this is a masjid, who's going to attack a masjid? Well, look around. So I strongly advocate for teaching and awareness and putting presentations on, which is something I've been doing for years, going around the DFW area, churches and mosques and schools, and educate people and parents on how to react to things like these, and let them, be safety conscious at all times. This is a very key thing to have.
And you mentioned schools there, and just a sort of a final question as we get into the last minute of the program. What are the kind of questions that you get from children? I know you talk about safety, and you talk about violence and stuff to children. What kind of concerns do you find from children? I mean, it's almost tragic that they're having to deal with these kind of issues, but I guess that's the reality.
The one question is that the first question that always pops up whenever we do a presentation like that, or show and tell, or a career day, is the kids want to know if I've ever been chased bad guys, how many people I've chased, how many people I've shot, how many times have I been shot, things like that. But they don't. We as parents, we don't instill the sense of security in our children, other than don't talk to strangers and stranger danger and things like that. But it needs to go further than that. But I think children need to be aware of also how to deal with emergency situations like fire drills and things like these.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Shaheed. I think our audience will really benefit from the advice that you've given. It's very practical. And also, I want to thank Professor Eisenberg as well for her contribution today. It was very poignant and, again, very uplifting to hear what she had to say. That's all we have time for this week. I want to thank our guests, as I said. Let's please tune in next Thursday, 2 p.m. for The Viewpoint, only on Radio Caravan, 104.1 FM. Goodbye from us in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.